I'm back with another book video. These are 7 books that you need to read or else you are missing out because I devoured all of these books. We have mystery, romance, suspense, thriller, all of the vibes. And I feel like whether you're not into reading or you're super into reading, either these books will snap you into it and you'll be obsessed, or it'll just make you even more obsessed. I'll have all these books linked down below if you want to check it out. I also do have a Goodreads. I get that asked a lot if I have one, and I do, so I'll link that down below as well if you want to check that out. That being said, let's talk about books. I wanted to start off with this one. This is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I have heard so much about this book, and anytime that a book has a lot of hype surrounding it, before I read it, I take a moment of silence to appreciate that I'm probably gonna wish I could read it again for the first time, and that's exactly how I felt. When I was reading this, it felt like a frantic race to the finish line to figure out what happened. It's about this woman named Casey who is recently widowed, and she retreats to her family's lake house in Vermont to escape bad press that she's getting surrounding her husband's death and alcoholism problems that she had. With a ton of free time and nothing else better to do, wanting a distraction from her life, she picks up a pair of binoculars and spends her time drinking endless amounts of bourbon and also keeping a very close eye on the house across the lake, which houses a couple who is uber wealthy, and she starts to see things that make her want to keep watching more. One day, Casey ends up saving Catherine from drowning in the lake, and they start to form a very close friendship and bond. And the more Casey gets to know her, the more she secretly watches what's going on in their house. She starts to realize that their marriage is not what it seems. So when Catherine suddenly vanishes, Casey's life is consumed with trying to piece together what happened, but then she ends up uncovering a very dark reality that no one could have seen coming. And I read a lot of mystery, suspense, thriller books, and so it's always interesting to me when a book can catch me off guard, because I feel like, you know, there's usually a twist that you can kind of expect after a certain point, but this one had me very surprised, which is a very nice feeling because I was jaw on the floor, just like, what is going on? Interestingly enough, one of the things I actually liked about this book was that it was a very slow burn, so the pace of the book wasn't super quick. It wasn't like from the beginning to end, it was just filled with suspense and all of these, you know, feelings. But in normal cases, I feel like that could be dangerous because you might get bored with the book, but I feel like the little hints that are interspersed throughout each chapter, and the more you read, the more that it builds, I really liked, and it definitely kept me very engaged, which sometimes with a slower paced book that doesn't really happen. I felt very blindsided by the plot twist. And the twist that it took, this isn't a spoiler or anything, it wasn't my favorite kind of element to have in a book, but it still was very good. I picked up a few more of this author's books, so I'm very excited to get into those. I have found a new favorite author, and that is Abby Jimenez. I read the Happy Ever After playlist by her. I didn't realize that there was an order to these books, and so I'll put the order on the screen in which order you're supposed to read her books, because technically these are all, and I have another book from her that I'll talk about in a sec, but technically these are all standalone books, like you can read them by themselves. But if you want to read it in order, I definitely recommend doing that because I didn't know that that was a thing. And so when I posted that I read it, people were like, did you even read the ones before it? And I was like, what? So I did some research, and these are standalone books, but they all kind of exist in the same world. And so if you read one book before another, it might give away a little, you know, a little something from another book. And there's interspersements of characters from one book that appear in another, which actually makes it really fun to read because you're like, wait, I know these characters. So it kind of exists in that same world. However, you can read her books just by themselves, which is accidentally what I did. However, still a 10 out of 10 amazing experience. This book is the Happy Ever After playlist. I have been very stingy with rating a book 5 stars because I really want it to like mean something. This was a 5-star read. I had so much fun reading it. One of my favorite things about this author is that she is funny. The way she writes, actually, you know, it's really hard to evoke real physical emotions out of a reader and make them feel like they're so in this book that they are literally witnessing what's going on and actually a part of it, for them to actually feel something. I was actually laughing out loud at this book. She writes in such a way that attaches you so full-heartedly to these characters. This book is about a woman named Sloane who recently had her fiance die in a really tragic accident. Everything in her life feels like it's being put on hold. She can't seem to get her life back together, understandably so, because she's under really hard circumstances. But when a random dog jumps on her hood of her car and dives through her sunroof at an intersection, she kind of feels like her life is turning around because the dog is giving her life purpose, but she doesn't know who the dog belongs to. She starts exercising again by taking him out on walks, going outside. She had no idea who the owner of this dog was. She tried for 2 weeks, but had unreturned calls and texts, but finally it's returned and the owner wants his dog back. But Miss Sloane is not going down without a fight. Between some very flirty texts and phone calls, she can't deny that she feels a connection towards this new guy, even though she has no idea who he is. Who knows what will happen when they meet in person? With his music career on the rise, how long will he really stick around? And is it possible for Sloane to survive another heartbreak? I loved it so much. I have been really enjoying adult romances. I feel like I don't relate as much to YA romance anymore just because, I don't know, maybe like the age I'm at, I don't really want to read about high schoolers, even college. Sometimes I'm like, I can't really relate to that anymore, but this was the perfect blend. It wasn't too adult romance where there's like a ton of smut. I mean, sometimes that's the vibe, don't get me wrong, but other times I'm not looking for that. And this was just the perfect amount of everything. I think my favorite part about this entire book is that every chapter has a different song to go along with it. So I didn't notice it until chapter 3, but there's a little song that you can listen to that kind of goes along with the theme of the chapter. So I looked on Spotify and someone took the liberty of making the entire playlist for the whole book. What would be a book review video for me without something from Miss Frida? I read The Wife Upstairs by Frida McFadden. I haven't read a book that was quite as kind of like almost uncomfortable to read in a very long time, but in a good way. It's a mystery thriller book. I think what I enjoyed most was that this book took a lot of unexpected twists and turns, which again, like I said, is very surprising because I've read so many of McFadden's books that by now you think I would start to see a pattern, but each time I'm proven wrong because I can just never really see what's coming. Especially the last 4 chapters. It's about a woman named Sylvia who is very desperate for work, so when a husband hires her to help take care of his wife, she doesn't turn it down, even though she gets a little bit of a weird feeling about it. The wife that she'll be taking care of, Victoria, was in a terrible accident. She can't do anything herself, she can hardly speak, and basically needs 24-hour care. And so Sylvia is hired to kind of just keep her company. But in a turn of events, Victoria isn't as badly off as Sylvia was led to believe. And there's a story that she's so clearly desperately trying to tell Sylvia, almost warn her about, but she can't get out the words. That's when Sylvia discovers Victoria's hidden diary, and that's when things start to take a turn. I love an alternating timeline. In this one, it's from Sylvia's point of view and what she's experiencing, and then it also flashes to Victoria's diary entries that kind of help you piece together what is going on. I don't ever want to give spoilers in these videos, so I won't. Basically, when I'm giving these synopsises, I'm kind of just reiterating what's on the back of this book. But I will say this book definitely had some strong vibes of another book that I've read in the past that I also really loved, but it kind of felt a little bit similar to that. Anyway, great read, very shocking, kind of made me a little uncomfortable. It's my favorite. A few days ago, I just finished reading Lisa Jules' None of This Is True. Clearly, I've been in a very big mystery mood. I really love this author. I've read a few books from her by now, and I think this is my favorite one that I read from her thus far. I believe I gave it 4 stars. This was one of the most entertaining reads just because there's a lot of stuff that's sprinkled in between the pages here and there that make you kind of start to see things in a different light and kind of piece together what's going on, and it just made it super exciting to read. I was kind of creeped out at some points and a little bit unsettled, and I think it's just a testament to how well this book was written. I forgot to write my own review of what the book's about, which I do because every time I read, I always forget what I read about 5 minutes after, which is an issue. I'll read from The author herself. When a famous podcaster interviews a stranger promising to divulge the story of a lifetime, secrets emerge that threaten to expose the truth of the lives they've both worked hard to project and protect. I feel like this is very unprofessional of me to be like reading this to you verbatim, but you know what, it's fine. Celebrating her 45th birthday at the hot new local pub, popular podcaster Alex Summer crosses paths with an unassuming woman called Josie Fair. Josie, it turns out, is also celebrating her 45th birthday, and they are in fact birthday twins. A few days later, Alex and Josie bump into each other again, this time outside Alex's children's school. Josie has been listening to Alex's podcast and thinks she might be an interesting subject for her series. She is, she tells Alex, on the cusp of great changes in her life. Josie's life appears to be strange and complicated, and although Alex finds her unsettling, she can't quite resist the temptation to keep going on the project. Slowly, she starts to realize that Josie is hiding some very dark secrets, and before she knows it, Josie has inveigled her way into Alex's life and into her home. But just as quickly as she had arrived, Josie Fair disappears. Only then does Alex discover that Josie has left a terrible and terrifying legacy in her wake, and that Alex has become the subject of her own true crime podcast with her life and her family's lives engraved. With her life and her family's lives in grave danger. Ta-da! That's what this book is about. One of the only things that I didn't really enjoy about this book was that the ending felt a little open-ended. Like, it didn't really feel like an ending. It kind of left it up to you to decide. Kind of like how in Verity, if you've read that book, at the end, if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about, but you don't know if the manuscript was true or the letter. Kind of like that. You're like, where's my answers? But I think that's what makes this book so intriguing, is that it's kind of up to you to decide. I then read my first book by this author, Sally Hepworth, The Mother-in-Law, which I was already intrigued by the title because I'm like, ooh, typically when people talk about mother-in-laws, it's surrounded by some sort of drama. Like, that's just typically, and I was not wrong. On this book, it says everyone in this family is hiding something, which was definitely true. Lucy has always tried to get on her mother-in-law's good side, but Diana had always been very reserved and kept Lucy at an arm's length, despite all of her efforts. To the rest of the world, Diana seemed to be a strong, determined woman, very generous. She gave a lot of her time and money to charity, but Lucy starts to see that there is a dark truth to her mother-in-law that no one else seems to see. But that was 5 years ago, because now Diana is dead with a suicide note claiming that the cancer was just too much and she couldn't handle it. However, in the autopsy done on her body, there was no sign of cancer. And it does find traces of poison and suffocation. It is a twisty page turner where you start to uncover more about who could possibly want Diana dead and why at the 11th hour she disinherited her children from her fat trust and will. Lots of money. What I liked about this is that over the course of the story, you get to dive into both the daughter-in-law's head and the mother-in-law's head, giving both of their perspectives and their side of the story, which makes things so interesting, getting to kind of piece it together that way. And it felt like each chapter presented a clue as to what really happened. I think the only thing I kind of disliked was that the buildup of the story felt a little bit drawn out at some points, which could just be a byproduct of me being a little impatient. This book right here, Ward D, again, by Miss Frida McFadden, she gets me. She gets what I want, she does. This was one of those books that was so fast-paced, it really kept me on my toes and just made it interesting throughout the whole way. It is about a medical student who's having her first ever overnight shift in a psychiatric ward, and she's dreading it for reasons that she can tell no one about. And due to the high level of security of the ward, there's no leaving until morning. So over the course of this shift, she begins to uncover a lot of horrifying things. And it was very shocking to read about. It reveals a past that she wishes It reveals the past that she wishes she could escape and how the past kind of plays into it. This was a book where there was twist after twist. You don't know who you can trust. And it's just constantly like kind of hurts your brain a little bit. One of the issues I had with this book was I felt like the portrayal of mental illness was a little bit problematic. So if that is something you are sensitive to, I would keep that in mind. Last but not least, this is probably my favorite book out of all the books I just shared. It is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. Is this the last book that she most recently wrote and the last book in the order that I was supposed to read it? Yes, because I didn't know. However, like I said, these are also standalone books. I also gave this 5 stars because It speaks for itself. It is one of the best books I've read in a very long time. The trope is an enemies to friends to lovers-ish, if you could say that. And I felt like it depicted an adult relationship with such beauty and realness that I really appreciated. The humor that was sprinkled in this book was so fun and unmatched. It came in at the perfect times. It's about Dr. Brianna Ortiz, who feels like her life is ending. Her divorce from a cheating husband is being finalized, and her brother is desperately trying to find a kidney donor with no luck. A new man, his name is Jacob, starts working at the hospital, and his reputation kind of starts in the gutter. She kind of feels like she has him all figured out until he sends her a letter that changes everything, and she realizes she had it all wrong. Their connection is growing, they're becoming friends, and even though she's sworn off of men from her traumatic childhood and the whole situation with her ex, she can't help but realize how quietly sexy he is. Not only that, but he tests as a match for her brother's kidney donor, which is something she could never repay him for, but he has a favor to ask from her that she cannot resist. This became one of my comfort books. I thought that Jacob's character was so beyond relatable. It made me feel very seen, especially with what he experiences being someone who is a chronic overthinker, deals with some pretty crippling anxiety, and it felt very accurately written to some of the things I've experienced. And so reading it, I don't know, it just felt so cozy. I felt very understood, and it made his character seem very real to me. And what I loved most of all, I always love this in a romance book, but the alternating timelines between her point of view and his point of view, made it so good because you get to get into both of their heads and see what they're thinking about each other. And also the tension in this book made me want to pull out my hair and scream. I'll say that. So these are the 7 books you need to read. I stand by these. I love these. I think they are great books. Again, I'll have them linked down below. If you, based on these books that I shared, if you have any recent favorite reads, comment them down below because I'm always looking to, I guess, spend more money on books. I don't know. And you know what? If this video wasn't enough to convince you to start reading, think about how mysterious and hot you'll look when you do it.